right, Jessica, thanks so much. For more analysis of the China-U.S. high-level military meeting, joining us now is Ivan Eland. He's a senior fellow and director of the Center on Peace and Liberty. We want to welcome you to the show. Let's talk about some of the tense areas. Of course, China feels kind of, well, I wouldn't say threatened, but they kind of see this as encirclement, this pivot to Asia. And of course, the U.S. sees it differently. How do these two kind of reconcile that?
Well, I think China has some reason to think that. I mean, the U.S. has continued all the Cold War alliances that were originally set up to contain the Soviet Union and a different China back in the Cold War, and now these alliances are still there and being strengthened. So I think China probably has some sort of a case to make on that. And of course, the U.S. is just used to doing these things, and of course they pushed NATO east on the Russians after the Cold War. So to me, the U.S. has exhibited a Cold War policy. Obama just accused the Russians of exhibiting, or Mr. Putin of exhibiting that. But I think the U.S. has, by keeping Cold War alliances around and pushing them forward and pivoting, in this case, to Asia. And so.
Why do you think that is? Is it just a comfort factor? I mean, the allegations on the part of the president towards Russia, and then, of course, what you're saying about the United States, is it just a certain posturing that the military is comfortable with, and they get uncomfortable if they move into a different zone? Or?
Well, I think it's not only the military, but I think the politicians have been on Cold War light policy since the Cold War ended in 1989 or 1991, depending on what year you think it ended. But certainly they get into a routine. There's a military-industrial complex here in the U.S. that pushes threats so that more weapons can be built and that sort of thing. And I think that that's a factor as well. But I think frankly, that policy is outdated. China is not the China from before, and it's not the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union, the United States didn't have a very strong economic relationship with the Soviet Union because the Soviet Union never made anything that anybody wanted to buy. Today, China exports all over the world many different things and exports a lot to the U.S., and I think we really need to recalibrate our thinking on what's important. And right now we have the ridiculous situation of the U.S. borrowing money from China to defend other countries against China. And if you stop to think about that, that's crazy, right? And that's the U.S. policy.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that, because one of the areas that we see to ebb and flow is the Diaoyu Islands, the conflict between China and Japan. Can the United States play a helpful role in that, or should they just butt out?
Well, I think they should butt out, because if you want to look at it from just U.S. interests and not anything else, Japan and other countries, the South China Sea, the East China Sea, all those countries have some sort of relationship with the U.S. and could drag us into a nuclear conflict with China. Now, that's probably a low probability, since the Chinese and the U.S., it's not a Cold War relationship. But nevertheless, when you have two nuclear powers standing there, you can get dragged into things you don't want to. And if there's any you have to know history. World War I, none of the countries really wanted to go to war with each other, but they had all these entangling alliances which pulled them into the war. And of course, it was a cataclysmic war. And these alliances are left over from the Cold War that the U.S. has. And I think the U.S. is responsible for helping to defend Japan or the Philippines if it got into a tussle with China over some of these islands, depending on which body of water you're talking about.
Well, thank you for coming in. Love your analysis. Appreciate you stopping by, and we'll talk to you again, I'm sure, in the future.
Thank you.